Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Zena Collins. I am the Director of Business Development and Brand Strategy Consulting. I'm also a Mesquite Master Facilitator in the Mayor Salovey Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test Certification Program. And I call myself an emotional intelligent architect working across culture change, project management, the creative industries as well, to look at how do you embed a human-centered approach to driving change and transformation in organizations and the creative industries. So it is my great pleasure to be here with Dr. Peter Salovey, Dr. Jack John Mayer, and Dr. David Caruso, who I will refer to throughout this session as Peter, Jack, and David. They, as you are, I'm sure you're aware, are the pioneers in the hard ability approach to emotional intelligence. So it is my great privilege to be hosting this session. I trained in 2010 in the Mesquite approach, and for me, working in professional services at that time, it was transformational to have this model to think about how do people manage their emotions through change, transformation, build relationships with diverse teams across the world, and what tools and approaches can we use to help people to better understand emotions, not as barriers, but as tools to be able to improve the way they're working in the workplace. So I'd like to introduce, I will send out after this session the recording and also the bios of everybody. So I'm not going to go into detail so that we can spend most of the time having the conversation. So Dr. John Jack Mayer is Professor of Psychology at the University of New Hampshire, and he's the co-author of the 1990 paper called Emotional Intelligence that defined what emotional intelligence is as a concept. He's also the co-developer of the Mesquite and the Mesquite 2, and also creator of the Test of Personal Intelligence. Dr. Peter Salovey is also co-author of that paper from 1990. He's the Sterling Professor for Psychology at Yale University and also co-author of the book, The Emotional Intelligent Manager with Dr. David Caruso. He previously was the 23rd president of Yale as well. And so we'll be hearing about how he had used the model to guide his leadership through growth, opportunities, and challenges during his leadership there. Dr. David Caruso is a psychologist and also an author, along with Dr. Peter Salovey, Dr. John Mayer of the Mesquite and the Mesquite 2, co-author of the Emotional Intelligent Manager book, and also co-author of Solving Leader's Guide to Solving Challenges with Emotional Intelligence, widely used in the workplace with Lisa Reese. So I would ask you to stay on mute during this time. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Randeep Kaur is here and she will be helping to facilitate the questions in the chat. So thank you, Randeep. So just want to acknowledge that this is a safe space. And so we are here to all learn and experience. And so please feel free to ask questions, but respectfully in the chat as we go through this conversation. So welcome, Peter, David, John, Jack. So I just want to start off really, because we're going to frame this conversation around past, present, future of emotional intelligence. So I'd really be interested to understand the spark. When I reread the paper, I reread it today because I wanted to have it fresh in my mind. One of the closing themes in the paper was about using this model to improve the way we build relationships, close relationships, and also professional relationships. So what were you trying to solve in early 80s, 90s when you first proposed this approach to emotional intelligence? Jack, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm not sure that there was specifically an idea that I guess the problem I was trying to solve was a sense that there was a greater coherence in the study of Peter and I were both at the time studying how emotions influenced cognition. Separately, we were largely unaware of one another's work, but we got more familiar with one another's work. And I guess the issue for me was it seemed like there was a lurking coherence through that literature. that there was some sense, there was some reason for emotion to affect cognition, um, and that it would be helpful to try to pin that down. And then also, I had just finished up a research associateship as a head of an intelligence lab. And so one of the things I was thinking about was how emotions might enhance intelligence rather than disrupt it. And then Peter and I started talking, and well, I'll let Peter speak for himself, but I think we discovered we were on the same wavelength.
Yeah, I think that's right. We're both interested in how emotions affect thinking and whether you could talk in more specific terms than that. That literature used to just talk about people in that area used to just talk about moods and memory. But there was a much broader way in which emotion and thinking could interact. The other thing that struck me, Jack came at it a bit more with this intelligence background. I came at it from the study of different emotions. I've been studying jealousy and envy and things like that. But we would go to conferences. In fact, the conference where we began writing this paper was one of them, where they'd be on emotion regulation, let's say, or another conference on facial expressions, or another conference on the language of emotion, or what have you. And the researchers in these various fields didn't really know of each other's work. There was no coherent way of talking about emotions and particularly their impact on thinking and behavior. Rather, people just took a little slice of it.
Yeah.
So
Even
part of
worse,
that first article was that was
they they knew of each other's work, but they didn't discuss each other's work.
right, right. Maybe that's a fairer way to say it. And so we wanted to give them a framework. At that time, we weren't really thinking about testing and assessment per se. I mean, it was lurking, but mostly we were
Well,
thinking about like, how do we create order out of this crazy field?
yeah.
And that's what I love so much about this model is connects the dots. It's a dot connector. So tell us a little bit about the moment where you and Jack met and the way that you formed your relationship to decide that I can work with this person to figure this out. And actually they can help me connect dots that I'm not able to connect by myself with this work that I'm doing. Like how did that happen? What was the
May I
spark?
start with that, Peter? Because
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I heard of you before you heard of me. Uh, I took a postdoc at Stanford University, and while I was there, a few of the grad students and professors would occasionally mention, "Oh, there was this guy here, there was this undergrad here named Peter Salovey." And I honestly I don't remember quite in what connection it was, but when I started talking about what I was interested in, I heard of Peter, and then when I got my first faculty position, which was at SUNY Purchase, what was then called SUNY Purchase in uh, Westchester, New York,
And down the
uh,
road from you. Yeah.
down the road from Peter, I continued to hear about Peter, and then made his acquaintance at Yale, actually through David, inadvertently, because David invited me up to Yale to uh, to work with Ed Ziegler. Remember that, David? So that's what brought me to Yale. At first was actually not Peter, but I already knew of Peter, and that there was something
You
special
came.
there.
I gave a job talk on jealousy actually, and you I think came to it.
Yes, yeah,
It was like the part of my interview for becoming a faculty member at Yale. I had been a graduate student there,
yeah.
and
And I was
Jack worked with people. I didn't know Jack per se. I mean, we're talking 19. This is like 1985, 86,
1988. Yeah,
87. By 88, we're starting to work on this paper.
yeah, yeah.
And but Jack worked with people whose work I knew at Stanford, and I was like, oh, he's the guy who connects all these individuals whose work I was reading.
So when did David, when did you come in the picture? So you started to think about emotional intelligence and connecting the dots with all these different concepts and theories, and then you start to think about the potential of turning it into something that could be tested or assessed. Um, how did that come about, and how did you find your lanes in the collaboration to develop this test, that which we now know as the Mayer, Salovey, Caruso emotional intelligence test. And is there any reason why the M comes first? I was always intrigued by that.
In psychology at the time, Zena, it was the reverse order, so the most important author was last. It's a little known fact, actually. I'm glad we're recording this, but that's the main reason. But yeah, we just stuck with it all these years.
Jack had the strongest psychometric background in tests and measures and how to assess things. And
well, David, do you want to say something about that Doug's lab?
Yeah, well, Jack and I went to grad school together. So the lab that he ran, I was part of that intelligence lab where, I went to grad school to study theories of intelligence and alternative ways of defining it and measuring it. So, that was my background. And then I did a postdoc in developmental psych, working with Ed Ziegler and somebody called Bob Sternberg, also both focused on the area of intelligence. Sternberg about different ways of conceptualizing it, and then different ways of measuring it as well. So I had the interest in.
So I think in addition to enjoying each other's company and becoming friends, Jack and David going back even further than Jack and me, and then David and me, but all of it kind of coming together over a period of half a dozen years or so. David represents the intelligence tradition very strongly and with a more developmental angle, I think. Jack, also in the intelligence tradition, but this very strong emotion and cognition area and very strong psychometrics and personality theory. And I sort of came at it also working in emotion and cognition, but developing a bit bigger interest in emotions per se, emotion theory, and what are emotions, and what are, how do we differentiate them? And I did in graduate school, I worked on envy and jealousy as two interesting emotions. As an undergraduate, I was working on mood and helping behavior. So I really came at it less from the intelligence or the measurement side and much more on the emotion side. But it all we had enough overlap, and it was just complementary perspectives, I think.
Yeah, and you and I also had shared David and I shared a background of being in the same lab studying intelligence, and you and I shared having backgrounds in clinical psychology, although I never finished the clinical program, but we both had a sense of the values of clinical measurement.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think it's important to really understand the origin story. Like what we hear is people coming together with different disciplines to be able to think creatively, as well as grounding in science in terms of how do you come up with solutions for something that at the time seemed so abstract as emotions. And I know we have people from different fields on the call. So some people from the creative industry, some people who are psychologists. So just to level set, how do you define emotions? What are the difference between emotions, moods, and feelings, so that people have a foundational understanding of how you define that?
I have no feeling for that one. Do you want to do that one?
You don't have any affect for that one, Jack? Maybe Peter can handle that.
Yeah, I mean, I think emotions generally occur in reaction to a specific stimulus, and they tend to be a set of feelings, thoughts, and behavioral tendencies that usually are rooted in something that was originally adaptive. Fear motivating us to run when in the presence of a threatening stimulus, that kind of thing. I think of moods as a little bit more, a little less focused on a specific stimulus. You often don't know why you're in a certain mood. You generally do know why you're experiencing a certain emotion. And longer lasting, a little more diffuse, a little less motivating. Feelings, I think, are part of both moods and emotions. They're the part that you feel in your body. That's a part of this. And I think by and large, that definition plus or minus, those definitions plus or minus are kind of agreed upon by the field. There's a little less agreement on whether emotions are just a collections of things going on in our body that we label from a kind of from cultural learning, or whether we are wired up to feel specific emotions that can be differentiated in the brain or through physiology and facial expression, and that they're discrete, and that some of them are more basic, and others of them are built up from combinations of the basic ones, kind of like colors. But that was the big debate when we started in the field, and it remains the big debate in the field. It remains a debate in the field.
So,
Sorry.
so go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that as Peter was talking, he reminds me of all the incredible research on emotions that was going on in the time at the time that helped us not start from square one. We had Robert Plutchik talking about the evolutionary significance of emotions and how they communicated signals. Like, for example, if you're afraid, that means that you might run away or do something else related to fear. There was depressive realism, a thought that perhaps in depressed moods you would be more accurate in certain kinds of judgments, but not others. There was an enormous amount of work going around at the time that was really helpful to us. I know I'm in saying this, I have apologies to like a dozen other researchers who are all doing really important stuff that we could draw on at the time.
It's a bit of a shift in psychology in the 80s, right? Psychology had been, in the earlier part of the century, kind of dominated by psychoanalytic theorizing, like Freud, and then behaviorism became the dominant paradigm, like uh, people like Pavlov and Thorndike and eventually Skinner. But and then a cognitive revolution hit 60s, 70s, where all of a sudden it wasn't just stimulus and response, but it was the idea that people had thinking, working brains, and we needed to study what happened between the stimulus and the response. And all, behaviorism and the cognitive revolution really were not all that focused on emotions. But then suddenly, and I would say the late 70s in particular, there were things happening, don't get me wrong, but particularly late 70s, 80s, all of a sudden people got really interested in emotion, and that has continued to this very day.
What do you think drove that shift?
That's a good question. I think there were all kinds of phenomena going on in psychology that just couldn't be explained by a strictly cognitive point of view, let alone by behaviorism.
Yeah. And I know if we think about today and the conversations around, what is emotional intelligence, there are a number of different schools of thought in terms of how we describe emotional intelligence. And this model is firmly rooted in what we call a hard ability, science-based model. I'd love to hear your perspective on, are there other models that could be called emotional intelligence, or is this model the preeminent model of emotional intelligence?
Jack and David just finished a paper on this topic, so one of them should answer.
Yeah, so I think from my perspective at least, there has been a lot of good research done under the umbrella of the term emotional intelligence, but a lot of it misuses the term, and is probably increasingly, I guess, I guess when that first came out. So let me back up for a minute. We started with an idea, as we said in the 1990 paper, that this might be an intelligence. We didn't know. We had a second paper in 1990 that tested the idea that there might be an intelligence there. And it was rather shocking. It had a rather shocking result, which is that it seemed promising. And it seemed as if we were integrating, there was at the time, perspectives on accuracy in perceiving emotions in faces. And then there was some work on perceiving emotion-like stimuli in abstract designs. And we demonstrated, to somewhat to my surprise, that those two things seemed to be related. They were not distinct, independent areas. And so through the early 90s, we kept conducting very small studies in this regard up to a point, and then we got bigger in our ambitions. But at the same time, there was a popularization of the idea, and in that popularization, there was a lot of it drew on parts, definitely drew on our article, but it drew on parts of our article in a different kind of a way, thinking about emotional intelligence as, in addition to intelligence, encompassing a great number of personality characteristics, or what we're suggesting might better be called socio-emotional attributes. And initially, and then people made measures of socio-emotional attributes, which were very different than the intelligence
So
research we were doing.
things like optimism or happiness, or things that are perfectly good things to measure.
Important
The other
things
thing well, I'm sorry.
Important things to measure.
Yeah, but not really emotion-related skills.
Yeah.
Right, or abilities, and so the measurement of them was often self-report. So people would ask, do you tend to look on the bright side or on the dark side of things, right? And if you said bright side, you were more optimistic. We were never going to try to measure emotional intelligence by asking people, do you think you're the kind of person who's pretty smart about your feelings? Right? Do you think you're the kind of person who understands the facial expressions of others? Rather, we wanted to measure emotional intelligence by measuring those skills. Give you a face and ask you to tell us what is the emotion in that face. Give you an emotional word and ask you to define it, right?
What really complicated matters, Peter, sorry,
yeah, please.
You on. What really complicated matters was that you had these sort of two different or three different really weird, it was weird to me that there were three different measurement approaches. There was defining emotional intelligence properly and measuring it as an ability, which made sense to me. Then there was defining emotional intelligence properly and measuring it as self-report, as Peter just said. And then third, there was defining emotional intelligence as something entirely different, these socio-emotional attributes of happiness and optimism and all good stuff, all important stuff, but not had nothing to do with emotional intelligence. And then, measuring it either through self-report or occasionally observer report. So you had these three areas, and I think we lost control of a lot of the narrative. We couldn't control a lot of the narrative in there. We couldn't review all the papers that were being submitted. Besides, early on, it was unclear. I suppose if you were a naive, I hate to refer to it that way, but I guess, to be honest, from my perspective, as somebody who'd studied measurement and studied emotions and intelligence, if you were unfamiliar with the area, maybe you would think that those things were related. It was pretty clear from the start. I mean, by 2000, we were writing, these things are different models. But I don't think other people believed us until, starting around 2010, 2015, the research just became unmistakable that these different measurement approaches were unrelated to one another, and the different content areas, that is actually emotional problem solving versus socio-emotional attributes, are totally different from one another. They're entirely uncorrelated. So you can be early on, I got an email from somebody in Montreal who said, your idea of emotional intelligence is wrong. I'll tell you why. I have a patient who's depressed, and they scored really high on the MEIS, the multi-factor emotional intelligence scale. And I wrote back and I said, not wrong. You can be really depressed and really high in emotional intelligence. Two different things. But yeah, so I'll stop there and let the
And
two others
yeah,
join in.
no, I'm interested just to build on that. So, David, I know you've been using this model in professional practice. What have you seen in terms of the challenge where people don't know the difference between the two models when they're thinking about using it for either recruitment or other, I guess, workplace assessment type activities?
I mean, it's a really important distinction to make, right? Because you'll read articles in the popular press or in selection, you'll say, we need to hire people high on EQ and without any job analysis or whatever. And they may then go out and administer these self-report assessments and hire highly assertive people when that's kind of the exactly wrong thing you need. What you really needed were people who are good at picking up on cues, reading the room, understanding why people felt the way they did, managing tough emotions and things like that. So it's actually pretty important. It's not just wordplay, and it's not just jumbling terms. There's an impact of confusing these things, and
Yeah.
it can lead to bad decisions or incorrect decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think what makes it hard, what makes it so appealing, the assertiveness, happiness, optimism part, is that that's also really important to people's
Yes.
success. So people would point and say, well, look, it predicts all kinds of stuff. Well, yeah, it sure does. It's great stuff. It's just not emotional intelligence.
So there was a couple questions I want to bring into this conversation. So one I think is ties into what you're talking about in terms of thinking about emotions as good or bad rather than just data. So somebody's asked, so thank you, Eva, for the question. They had a discussion with an IT team lead today who said that anger is an emotion that should not be allowed within the work environment as it causes harm. How would you react to that question? How can teams benefit from anger?
I was just rereading something James Gross wrote. You guys know, he talked about emotion suppression, where, emotion suppression is really the a critical aspect of our relationships. Because if you don't suppress your thoughts or don't, yell at someone or hit them, that actually helps with relationships and things like that. So I think it's important to recognize the feeling of it or the emotion, what caused it, to understand it. Why do I feel that anger? And then managing it appropriately. So you don't hit people, you don't yell at them, you don't cause a kind of conflict. So, yeah, but anger, unbridled anger is very destructive and corrosive. However, if there's a real reason for it, it's because someone said something in a meeting that was insulting or whatever, I should feel anger. And I should use that anger and to motivate me to affect change or say something maybe after the meeting, but certainly not hit them uh, or yell at them in that meeting and make things worse. I don't know, Jack, it looked like you had a thought about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, to realize that often anger arises from injustice. Not always, but
No.
often, and to identify that injustice and then to see if something can be done about it. But actually, the thought that I was having is not about anger, but about anxiety.
Hmm.
In the After I left college, before I went back to grad school, I was working as a writer, and one of the and I naively would tell people I was anxious about something or something else, and I was coached by my colleagues. Uh, don't say you're anxious, say you're concerned. And I thought that was, and I was listening to that. I thought, well, that's really good coaching, and I'm gonna do that. Um, and it's sort of a natural reframe. So some of the because anxiety does come out of concern over various things. So it's not so off base. And I do think that there is this, as David points out, there's an importance to regulating emotions in the workplace. And Peter, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts about that. From
That's a perfect, yeah. That's a perfect segue. Sorry to cut you, Jack. To in your role, Peter, as president of Yale, how did you use this model to support the growth that you were able to achieve, but also some of the challenging dynamics that you may have had with managing faculty members and students' unpleasant emotions?
Sure. So, universities can be conflictual places because you've got various constituencies who have very different ideas of what they want from that university, right? Students want something, faculty, students want a learning environment, but to have some fun. Faculty often want autonomy to do their research. Administrators want to keep on budget and keep the wheels, moving in this forward direction. And then, trustees may have other long-term worries about the viability of the university long-term, and let alone, particularly these days, there's public and media expectations of what the university is all about. So aligning these various constituencies is very difficult. And in fact, you'll never get them perfectly aligned. If a university says everybody is in 100% agreement with what we need to do next, I would say they're lying, or that's some kind of very bizarre place. But you want to work toward more alignment than is typically the case. And to do that, you have to, as president, listen to people when they come in and talk to you, rather than thinking your job in that conversation is to solve the problem. My job is often to listen, empathize, reframe, put in context, right? And that requires a lot of emotional, I'm managing, I need to appreciate identify people's emotions, understand them, manage my own desire to, I know how to solve this problem. Let me just tell them how to solve this problem. So every day, almost in every conversation I'm having, whether it's in whether we're in crisis mode, whether we're in fundraising mode, whether I'm talking to a faculty member or a coach or a student, requires me to be sensitive to the feelings that are being expressed and understand where they're going and how they're motivating this person, and then to listen carefully and show empathy and inhibit the desire to just solve the problem, at least initially. And those are emotional intelligence skills. Also, when you get attacked in the newspaper or by a politician or whatever, that arouses your own feelings. And so, a certain amount of the leader's own emotional skills are going to matter a lot. Yeah.
You don't have to answer this, Peter, in this session, but at some point I wanted to know, is it burdensome to be one of the people who came up with the idea of emotional intelligence, that you have to, people expect you to act with emotional intelligence? As I say, you don't feel any pressure to answer this.
Yeah, no, it's true. People have expectations too, and while we may know a lot about emotional intelligence and how to measure it, none of us are miracle workers or can play God or anything like that.
Living it is something different than studying it.
We're all just trying our best.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think that's what's missed a lot of the times in these discussions is there's a framework that we can use as long as we're in situations where we have the emotional capacity to be able to apply it. So there's one thing to have the competencies and the capability, but if you find yourself in really high intense environments where you don't feel psychologically safe, or it's an unfamiliar situation, your ability to apply these becomes increasingly hard. And
Yeah,
so
that's true.
when you think about thank you for the questions in the chat. When you think about the test that you've evolved from the Mesquite to the Mesquite 2, there is a question in the chat that asks, can you explain the connection between emotional intelligence and colors? So just for those who aren't familiar with the Mesquite, it provides the ability to assess your emotions on 4 domains: perceiving emotions, connecting emotions to facilitate thinking, understanding emotions, and also managing emotions. And within each of those domains, there are activities or activities where your skills are tested. So in terms of perceiving emotions, I guess that would connect with the question around the connection between emotional intelligence and colors. Does anyone want to share, how are those two connected
Jack,
scientifically?
that probably refers to the second 1990 paper, right? But before you answer that, just so that was 1990 was that initial demonstration project. Then we did our multi-factor emotional intelligence scale where we had a bunch of abstract designs and so forth. And it worked, it quote unquote worked. The Mesquite, which came out in 2002, expanded that in terms of designs and so forth. What did people see? Did they read the room? Anybody in marketing would know the importance of that, or branding or logos. Um, and we had one study across cultures. We collected data in Argentina, US, India, Japan, and China, and found more similarities than differences. So we think it does work in general. Having said that, there was issues with face validity, meaning some people would look at this part of the assessment and say, like, what is this all about? Because they were unfamiliar with the model. So in the latest revision, Mesquite 2 and Mesquite second edition, that's gone. Which makes, if you actually use it as an assessment in terms of your practice, it makes your job a lot easier. So I just wanted to give that little context, Jack, before you went
Well,
back to
actually,
that.
I think you've answered it pretty well.
Well,
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to test, and what the Mesquite 2 does that the Mesquite didn't do as well, is first of all, it's shorter to administer, and second of all, it's as David was saying, it's more face valid. When somebody takes it, they don't have the reaction of what could this possibly be getting at? How could this matter at all? Which is often how they responded to the designs and the colors and things. But rather, it's not that they know what's being measured, but it has a little bit of better sense of plausibility, I think. Um,
To which I would just add that when we were starting out, and still to an extent, we were working hard, and we were working we were working really hard, but we were also having fun, and using colors seemed like a fun, creative thing to study, and
and it
and,
worked.
and it was,
It was
and it
valid.
worked.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
seems to work pretty well, but
you know, speaking of fun, though, also in that earlier assessment, we had music.
yeah.
So it goes back to your first question, your warm-up question. What's your favorite band or kind of music, But we had eight. We had a composer, come up with eight different, really short da, 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 da pieces, and we'd say what emotions are being expressed in this thing, and it was to have some fun, to make it interesting, and I think one of the key things that came out of it is that that was a factor, right? So even though we had four different ways of measuring your ability to perceive emotions, they all kind of coalesced together, or in a factor analysis, had one kind of coherent factor. So music has gone now as well, but um, yeah, we were having a little fun with it, and I think, but it also worked.
Yeah, but we experienced some kind, helpful suggestions to have a little bit less fun and get a little bit more, get a
They
little
got
more serious
a
about it
little easier to administer and use in the field,
and
and
explain.
yeah. Keep in
And
mind, people are using this, using the Mesquite 2, and as they did the Mesquite 1 in a lot of different fields. Yeah, the workplace is probably the most common, and David or others can talk a little bit more about how it's used in the workplace. But for job placement and for coaching and for self-improvement, it's being used in the workplace. It's also used clinically. I've seen studies of psychologists using it in a prison population to try to identify people with sociopathic tendencies. And there are many different potential applications here. And to be honest, if the tasks that you have to do on the test are too involving or too bizarre or too just uh, odd and unusual from a test taking point of view, it's just a little hard to get people to adopt the test. So that's why the music and the colors gave way to, you'll see on the Mesquite 2, if you haven't already started using it, much more what I call them, down to earth ways of assessing these abilities.
Well, there's a question for Kathy about the reliability and validity of the Mesquite 2 compared to the original Mesquite. So I think you've answered some of that, but David.
Jack, you want to just give a quick rundown?
Yeah, well, we're hopeful that the test will exhibit greater validity than the original Mesquite. That's going to be, we're going to wait on researchers and the predictions they make. It correlates pretty well with the original Mesquite, given there were substantial changes across the two tests and how they were constructed and how they were scored and so forth. In theory, the changes that we made should improve the validity of the test, and we're hopeful that that's what is borne out. The reliability of the test, well, we're measuring reliability at 4 domains, excuse me, rather than 12 tasks. And so the reliability of the 4 domains is better than the reliabilities at the task level of the original Mesquite. But there is one area, which is the one we call connecting emotions, or domain, excuse me, the domain that we call connecting emotions, which is less than what we would like. Another evolution in testing from particularly, I guess, 2005 maybe to the present, although there's no hard and fast dividing line, is the need for shorter tests because, well, maybe because people are online more, their attention spans are not quite as long as they used to be. They want a faster test. So we applied item response theory in addition to classical test theory, if you're familiar with those from the start, in order to make sure that every item on the Mesquite 2 contributed to the overall score and to its domain scores. So that wasn't the case with the Mesquite. It certainly wasn't the case with the MEIS, which if you've never taken the MEIS, you might be happy because it was 402 items long. Is that right?
Yeah, I have it right here. 402 items. Yeah, yeah.
402 items long. The Mesquite was down to 141, and the Mesquite 2, I believe, matches the overall reliability more or less at where it's about 80, it's 83 functional items, and there were a few items later that we discovered were not functional, but about 86 items or 87.
Yeah.
Well, we have 94 total, including the attention checks and the self-estimate, right? So yeah, but
Yeah.
that's a huge difference, right?
Yeah, takes
Huge.
about a half
And it's
hour.
fun, and Mesquite 2 is only online, and it's interesting, right? If you have a touch screen, you're dragging and dropping things. We've got on perceiving emotions, you have a face and a neutral face and an emotion face. We have videos. They're not quite micro expressions, but it's what was the emotion expressed there. So it's kind of interesting, and it is more not pun not intended, face valid as a result.
Yeah. Just quickly scrolling some of the questions that came in and seeing, people are asking about college students and whatever. The Mesquite 2 can be used, for an from an older teenager till the oldest, person. People do have to know how to read, but the application is quite the populations to which you can use the test are quite broad.
Yeah, it was normed on a joint U.S. and Canadian Census Bureau data.
And just there's a question that is based around thinking about how the Mesquite 2 has been updated with some of the new perspectives around emotion theory and science. So, for example, Lisa Fieldman Barrett's research around emotions as conceptual and contextual, in particular to how you revised it. Does it include some of that thinking in the revision of the Mesquite 2?
Certainly, we were aware of that thinking in making the Mesquite 2. I think that Lisa Feldman Barrett's research is excellent, and there's a lot of good ideas in it. but I don't think it invalidates the idea that there are some universals in facial expressions. And so, um, so I think that both can be true, that there are universal aspects of facial expressions which can be recognized, and also that to disambiguate that, it helps to have some context.
Yeah. And then another question relating to the renaming or facilitating thought to connecting emotions. What was the thinking around renaming the second domain?
Jack, before you answer that, because I think
Yes.
that was our kind of the battle of the bands to some extent. But just going back to the other question about universal emotions with item response theory, we started with 159 items. Jack, is that right? What was the initial item pool?
Yeah, 159 dropped to 153.
Yeah, and then to I think 111, and now to 83 functional items. So there's reasons for that, right? So not quite half, but we got rid of half of the items because they quote unquote did not work for various reasons, including things like differential item functioning or differential test functions, meaning you kind of you pull out any of the bias that might have existed unintentionally in those items. So it it works, and bad items are gone. So that's it's kind of a safety valve, I think, in terms of test development, in terms of whether it's social constructivist approach versus basic emotions, but all sorts of other aspects of developing a really good sound psychological assessment, but connecting and facilitating.
And I want to make sure we have a moment to think about some of the research that you've been doing, Jack, around personality intelligence and how that work has evolved out of the work that you did with emotional intelligence. Can you give us a bit of context in terms of the work that you've been doing around the test for personal intelligence? And is it a build, or where did that work come from?
I'd be happy to, but should we do the connecting emotions question first, or do we have time to do both or not?
Sure, we can do both.
Okay, so
Connect those two concepts, Jack.
connect those, yeah, don't try to connect those two concepts. During COVID, when we couldn't collect any more data, a really horrible thought arose for me, which is that maybe I and David were the only people who had full access to all of the, well, and Peter, but Peter was otherwise engaged in his presidency. We're the only people who had legal full access to the data sets for every single test that we had ever built. And that it was incumbent upon us to go back and visit that data with the new forms of factor analysis that had evolved over the last 20 years. So we went back with our colleagues from MHS, some of whom had left MHS, but were still interested and involved. And we analyzed all the 4 tests at the item level, and we learned all kinds of new things about them, some of which we didn't want to learn, and others of which we were happy to learn. And one of the things that seems to be the case, if we look at the commonalities across those 4 tests, and there are thousands and thousands of participants who took them, is that the facilitating area may have been misinterpreted and misnamed, and that a better way of looking at it is that it involves connecting emotional features from emotions themselves to a variety of other domains and media, like colors and pictures and so on. And so the facilitation task continues to work and works very well as a contributor to overall emotional intelligence. But connecting emotions seemed like a better name or connecting emotional features is the full mouthful, seemed like a better approach to that second domain of the test, or what used to be called branch.
Thank you, Jack. And then just build, and we've got a few minutes left, just briefly, just providing some context in terms of what is personal intelligence and how does it connect to the theory of emotional intelligence?
Yeah, so in continuing our work on emotional intelligence, we, also always kept in mind the fact that there had been a social intelligence proposed. There had never been an intelligence proposed, to the best of my knowledge, for a person based on personality, although Howard Gardner got very, very close with his intrapersonal intelligence. Um, so just as with emotional intelligence in the 1980s, there were all these precursor research areas. By the 2000s, there had been an enormous empirical developments in the field of personality psychology. And I saw the same evolution occurring in personality as a whole as I saw in emotions in the 1980s. And I thought, maybe it's time, maybe we can finally build a test of personal intelligence, that is, test about personality and intelligence. And so I wrote an article about that, and then with David Caruso's help and Abigail Panter, who's a psychometrician at University of North Carolina, we were able to build some of the first scales of personal intelligence. And more generally, we have now recommended or found evidence that there are two kinds of well, there are more than two kinds of broad intelligences, but that one way to divide broad intelligences is that there are broad intelligences which are more focused on abstract things like spatial relations and mathematical intelligence and so forth. And then there are people-centered intelligences like personal intelligence and emotional intelligence, for which there are really good measures, and social intelligence, for which there aren't really good measures, but it seems to relate to those two as well. That's a
Thank you.
mouthful, I'm sorry.
I mean, somebody said in the chat that there needs to be a part two. Every time I have these conversations, there is so much to unpack. And as we can see from the questions, there are so many different directions we can take it in terms of creativity, in terms of how this can be a model to address inequalities in the workplace, in terms of leadership skills, how you embed that in culture. They're big questions that I don't think we're going to be able to solve in the last 5 minutes, but I am going to take away the comments, and hopefully I can send you afterwards some responses to those questions. Just in terms of closing out, if there's any other questions, please feel free, quick questions, to put them in the chat. But I really want to get your perspective on the future. So we've talked about how you came together relationally, the present in terms of the Mesquite 2 as a model for assessing emotional intelligence, the difference between social emotional trait tests and emotional intelligence tests. And we can't have a session without mentioning artificial intelligence, AI. You mentioned it in your 1990s paper, which just shows you the conversation about artificial intelligence has been going on for a long time. But I'm interested in your perspective. You've written quite a few papers, Jack, around the impact of artificial intelligence on our society and your thoughts around how you might integrate emotional intelligence with it. I'm curious about your perspective on that, if you're willing to share.
Oh, I don't know if I have a quick answer for that. Plainly, I guess, last week I was most concerned about people de-skilling in key areas, like saying, well, I don't need to understand anything anymore because AI will take care of that for me. I'm just going to wear my meta glasses and, that will take care of my thinking for me. This week, I'm more concerned with how AI is like social networks before it, is being redesigned to capture people's attention a little bit more than I'm comfortable with. And there's a lot of emotional manipulation. There was a recent article, I think, in one of the technical journals, or maybe it could have been in a major newspaper, about how AI uses emotional manipulation to keep people talking to it. So I think we have to be careful about both sides, about the fact that we don't want to de-skill in understanding people and in empathizing with them, and we don't want to be emotionally manipulated by our social media and by our artificial intelligence.
Having said that, we can learn from AI how to be more emotionally intelligent. So, for example, people rate the empathy shown by an AI chatbot giving them medical information as higher than that of their doctors. Right? They rate the jokes generated by AI as funny as the ones that a human develops on their own. And so there are things that AI is doing to make you feel listened to help you feel that it has empathy. I just used it recently to help me diagnose a health condition, that provide us with feedback about our own skills. And so, I think as a tool, it's going to be a very, very useful tool. People are developing AI applications in the counseling area that look very promising. People are developing AI applications whereby, for example, in contexts like driving, that use sensors in your car to know how you're feeling and whether you should be allowed to drive at that moment. You seem too angry. Let's calm down. Everybody has had the experience of being on a phone tree where you really want to be speaking to a human. What if the AI that drives that phone answering system can detect in your voice irritation and anger and quickly switch you to a human, right? It's using emotional intelligence. It's identifying an emotion and then behaving on the basis of it. It can teach us how to do that better too. So I don't see it as a panacea. And Jack is certainly pointing out many of the challenges that cause concern, if not anxiety. But
Yeah, no, I appreciate your
there's
more
also,
positive
there's
outlook on
also
it.
some positive. Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
positive.
So we are at time. That went really quickly, and as somebody said, we definitely need a part two. There is so much we can learn, and so many different conversations we can have around this topic. So I just want to say thank you, Peter, David, and Jack, for taking time to have this conversation. And just one parting thought: if there's one myth about EI you never want to hear again, what would that be? And where should people not be using the Mesquite model to make decisions?
Right. I'll do the myth. The idea that in all contexts and always, EI is more important than IQ. And in certain contexts where everybody is average or above average in IQ, yeah, EI might be the differentiator, sure. But in the world where people can have a whole range of cognitive intelligence or IQ, as well as a whole range of emotional intelligence, IQ is going to matter a lot.
Thank you, Peter. Jack, David, any thoughts?
I'll second that. When people say EQ is twice as important as IQ, it's just silly. Don't say that. No.
That doesn't mean EI isn't important, however.
Yes, right. It's just a silly statement. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe Peter, David, and I can thank you and thank Randeep, who I know has been helping out for your wonderful viewing skills and your interest, and thank everybody for your interest in
Yeah, I want to thank for the great questions and your attention,
Yes,
and
thank you.
for those of you who are using the Mesquite 2 now in your work or plan to, we're very thankful for that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zena. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.